Okay, this is Tim Cain on game development roles. Let's dive in.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim.
Hi,
Today, I
Tim.
want to talk about game development roles.
Yeah,
Now, I could have sworn I had talked about this
I think
before,
he did.
but the closest I got was programming programming roles. But I
Mm,
have talked a lot about what makes a good game director, traits I look for in
I think we
producers, and
watched those.
challenges that programmers, artists, or designers have to face. So there's a lot of related videos, and I've linked them all in the description. But I'm gonna do this one now. I'm answering Seth the Guy GD, who asks, I was wondering if you have a video explaining the job in game development process and what they do.
Jobs, probably.
Artists, programmers, producers, leads, designers, and all that. I was having questions about that. I know that every studio is different, but could you explain it to me? I know it might be silly, their names are self explanatory, but would mean a lot. In other words, who does motion capture, who does quest
I
items?
don't. I think that's a good question. I don't think it's obvious necessarily when you say I'm a systems designer. Sure, okay, I design systems, but usually that's also the person responsible for balancing, right? And especially like a technical systems designer will be prototyping the systems, right, before creating the documentation or sending it off. Arguably, though, I think every designer should have technical skills. But either way, like every game designer should have technical skills. Either way, I think that's a good question because there are a lot of roles that seem weird and you don't know what falls under them, especially if you think of like technical artist. Like, well, what does that really encompass?
I get it, and I it is different in every studio, and I'll try
Yeah, it
to
is.
mention where those differences come in. Um, so I'm going to describe like what I encountered, and keep in mind I've never worked at really really huge companies, but I have worked on small and medium sized teams. So I will talk about that, and let's start with the game director. The game director has also in the past been called project leader. This is basically whoever is the keeper of the vision. Whoever is like, this is my idea for the game we're making. Doesn't mean a lot of people don't contribute, but who's like pushing this thing through? Who's
Well, like somebody has to be the owner of that. Somebody has to be the one to have the final say because, of course, you can just bicker endlessly in a room about it, but somebody has to finally say, no, this is what the game should have in it. So that's what we're going to do, right? That's how we're going to move forward. And he's right. Every single company calls this something different. I've heard project lead, I've heard game lead, game director, project director. Uh, Sometimes people will make up weird terms for it. I don't remember what the one was that I was given. I didn't like it though. Whatever I was called, I didn't like it. It was really stupid. I think it was called project lead. I didn't like that. Whatever.
steering the boat? Who writes the design pillars? Who decides what the goals are of all the different features that are in the game? And sometimes even writes the design docs for those features. That's the game director.
Yep.
That's the project leader. Also, towards the end of development, this is the person who will play the game a lot. No one will play the game, with the exception of possibly QA, more than the game director, because it's their vision. They've got to see all the different parts of the game. They've got to see
Yep.
as much as there is to see. They may not ever be able to see all of it, but they're going to try to see as much as they can to make sure that everything's aligned to that.
I would also say that a good producer plays the game a lot. He's right that I don't think anybody's going to play it more than the creative director or whatever, or the game director, whatever you want to call it. But I also think a good producer plays the game an awful lot.
Let me quickly jump to producer. Producers come in roughly three tiers. There's executive producer, which are usually only exist in bigger companies. Otherwise, they're called a lead producer. In a bigger company, you have an executive producer with lots of lead producers under them. In smaller companies, you may just have a lead producer. In which case, what that role does is they keep the master schedule for the game, all the estimates of how long things are going to take in all the different areas, so they can come up with here's when I think the game will ship, which may not align with when it's supposed to ship. They're the person who interfaces
Rarely
with
does
the
these days.
publisher. When the publisher calls, they tend to call the the executive or lead
Well, the
producer.
producer's just a liaison throughout the whole team too, you know, and he's right. Like it for smaller teams and companies, you might only have one or two producers. Usually one if it's a really small team, because of course you can't afford two, and usually your games aren't large enough in scope that you would need to. But you might have like Jira jockey producers, which is maybe not the kindest term, but ones that are literally just managing tasks, right? They're like the day to day producers, just making sure that, hey, is this sprint on time, getting done. And then you might have a producer above that that is acting more as the liaison between teams and publisher, and also just kind of handling larger scope and schedule of the game, and probably also the budget too to some extent.
They also interface with the other parts of the studio, like the owners, the president, the VPs, HR. Now, those people can reach out directly to people in the team too, but when they have general questions about the project, like is it on schedule, or when is the next time we're talking to the publisher, or when does localization start, they go to
Well,
the
the reason for that is that you don't want to bog down like your lead programmer by asking when a feature is going to be done, right? Ask the producer. That way, you know, that person is managing some of the larger features or the sprint as a whole, and making sure that tasks are getting done. And that way you don't have just multiple people hitting up the leads who are trying to get shit done, or, you know, even some of the seniors or something, and wasting their time. It really, you should let your game development team handle the game development, and let the producer be kind of the mouth, the spokesperson for the team, and what's getting done and what's on time. That way you just kind of leave all the bullshit and the politics and the scheduling drama away from the team itself.
the EP. The EP or lead also manages other producers, and they may even manage some external development. In really big titles, you
Yeah,
may
it's true.
hand art out to external companies, especially cinematics, localization, things like that. Anything that's not done in house will eventually get coordinated through the EP or the lead. And then under them, there are sometimes it's called assistant producer, sometimes it's called associate producer. Some places have both of those and they tier them. I can never remember if it's assistant producer is higher than associate or associate's higher than assistant. At Interplay, they were both called ass prods, affectionately.
Ass
What these
prods.
people do is they
Fuck, that's good. I've never heard that before. Ass prods. Oh god, I'm gonna start calling them that now. I like my
answer to
producers.
the
I love my
lead,
producers.
their lead, or the executive producer, and they manage strike teams. Strike teams are when you put together a small group of around 5 or 6 of the people on the game team to work on a particular part. Like there may be a combat strike team, there may be a stealth strike
Yep.
team, there may be
Very, very
a
smart way to produce.
cinematic strike team, there may be a lighting strike team, and it's usually a programmer, one or more programmers, artists, and designers managed by an assistant producer.
You'd be surprised, by the way, how uncommon that way of developing games can be, but that is the right way to do it. You know, strike teams are exceptional. They're a great way to kind of compartmentalize your development and make sure that they are, for instance, like you said, combat strike team. The only thing that those people need to wake up and worry about when they get um, into the team that morning is combat, 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 combat. That's it. It's really a great way to just focus and let other people deal with other bullshit. You know, I also call them like, you know, we say at Microraptor Games that we have open feature ownership, and that's so that anybody can become a owner of a feature, and then we create a strike team around that feature with the people that are best suited to solve that problem, while the rest of the team deals with miscellaneous things, smaller little requests or small bugs that need to be fixed. One big feature at a time, and we put a strike team together to deal with that feature, and we pull people in as necessary to assist with that.
They keep the schedules for those strike teams and everybody who's on them, and they pass those numbers up to the lead or the EP to put into the master schedule. They also handle some external developers as well. This leads us to programmer. And actually, really fast, let me talk about programmer, artists, and designers, what they all share in common. They all have a very similar hierarchy. Usually you have a director for that area.
True.
A programming director, a design director, or a uh, art director. These are the people who manage everyone under the leads. And the leads are leads in all the different areas. Now, on smaller projects, you may only have a lead programmer or a lead designer or a lead artist. And the sub areas are managed by seniors. But on really big projects, and this is what we did, say, on the Outer Worlds, you have a director, and the director talks to leads in all the different areas. And then adjacent to the lead is a principal. Principals are people who don't manage anyone, but do most of their work in one of those areas, like a highly specialized, really good at what they do person. And then under leads are seniors. Seniors are people who can manage their own work, make their own estimates, um, finish, help finish up designs and things, and work with
Teach
the
and review with
designers to come up
juniors
with like
too.
numbers and the exact things that have to be done to finish that. And then below that is sometimes they're called staff, sometimes they don't have any title, and there's other people who've been there a few years and they know their area pretty good and they do their work and they answer to a senior. And then there are juniors, and that's when they're newly hired. They haven't done this much before. They start as junior. Now, that's the hierarchy in programming, art, and design.
It's important too to note that a lot of this is dependent on company size, right? Where there's a lot of places that will say that most people you can realistically manage in a team is like, I don't know, it's like 8 or something. I don't know, I have the exact number, but it's pretty small. So you break up larger companies into smaller groups, creating that hierarchy so that they work efficiently in smaller, teams in this case, right? So that's why you would have that director managing maybe a couple, a lead, and then the lead has some seniors that kind of then go down chains, right? It all depends on company size. He's right. If you have like a super small company, like Microraptor is only going to be like 18 people, right? We're probably only going to have 2 designers. We don't need a lead. We just need them to work together to communicate. That's it. 2 people communicating, easy, no problem. We might have more programmers though, some like maybe 3 or 4 programmers during max production. In that case, we would want to have a lead and somebody in charge of the code architecture, right? So that they can delegate tasks into each other. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. Of course, when you have like a large game, some big AAA game with hundreds of people working on it, I don't know, take Red Dead Redemption 2, right? You're going to have a lot of people in charge of different branches of the company, different outsourcing teams if they needed to hire somebody to handle that. And you might have like 20 different people that are working as gameplay programmers, for instance, or even just working as combat programmers, right? So that's where you then have that hierarchy so that communication is handled properly and delegation is handled properly.
Now, in programmers, the areas could be graphics or gameplay
Engine.
or AI
Mm-hmm.
or UI or networking. Basically, any area that requires some programming expertise. A lot of generalists go into gameplay because gameplay is like writing up combat rule mechanics rules and writing up stealth rules and working on the dialogue system and stuff and things that need underlying mechanics that connect to the other systems like the user interfaces or AI. Art has the same hierarchy as programming, but their areas are quite different. That would be there are people who make 3D models, people who texture those models, people who rig those models, which means they put the bones in them to show how the model could move, and then the people who actually make them move called animators. There are concept artists who draw images and go, this is what we think the game is going to look like. And this can be anything from a level to scenery to furniture to pieces of artwork. Like this
Yeah,
is
if you ever buy like a game art book, it's usually filled with concept art, right? Or early renderings or level blockouts, but oftentimes they put all the pretty concept art there, and I love getting those books.
like we had concept artists do all the ads for the Outer Worlds. Um, there are cinematics artists. There are motion capture artists who specialize in getting mocap suits
A lot
on
of
people and
specializations.
dogs and all kinds of things and capturing the motion to be used for rigging and animation. Now, if you're a 2D artist, I've said in the past, there's a lot of room for you in games. You don't have to be a 3D artist. Textures are 2D. Icons for use in user
Yep, and
interfaces are
UI.
2D. Fonts in user interfaces are 2D.
Fonts is a
Usually
good
the
one too, yeah.
UIs themselves are 2D. So there's a lot of room for 2D artists still. Like I've said before, there are probably more 2D artists working in the industry today than there were in the 90s when it was all 2D artists.
That's interesting to think about. That's probably true though. Still, my World of Warcraft launch edition book from day zero launch still holds up today in concept art. That's amazing, Duritz. World of Warcraft launch edition book. It must fetch a pretty penny on eBay if you were ever to think about selling it, which you probably aren't, right? I don't remember which games I have art books for. I know I have it for Uncharted, all the Uncharted games, Last of Us. I think I have a Skyrim one, maybe? I don't know. Ever occurred to check? Even if you could find it, who knows? I have the Baldur's Gate 3 one as well. That one's pretty cool.
Um, and then
I love
there
concept art.
are the same hierarchy exists in design for designers. In there, the areas are things like system mechanics, which are character build, combat mechanics, stealth mechanics, dialogue mechanics, economy. There are narrative designers who create NPCs, write the dialogues for them, come up
We're
with the
having to
quests
do
for
that.
them. Although I'll put a little asterisk next to quests. There are UX designers. UX is the experience, where UI is the actual thing that pops up. The UX designers work with artists and programmers to get the user interfaces working. And then level designers, they make maps with the layout, towns, points of interest, POIs, and they also do quests. They work really closely with the narrative designers to get quests implemented.
You often have quest designers too, though, so there's a couple things. Like, it's important to note that level designers are not usually the ones that worry about the art of the level. They're mainly focused on the gameplay of the level, right? So it's like they're not worrying about whether to put a trash can there unless it has to do with the gameplay, right? Like you're hiding behind the trash can or something. Um, whether there's a tree there or something, again, if it doesn't have to do with the gameplay, they don't give a shit. That's for the level artist to worry about. There are specifically quest designers too, and you will have level designers and quest designers work in tandem to make sure that I don't know, for instance, if a quest needs to have enough, gameplay in it, maybe like 3 battles, then we need to stagger the battles and we need to talk to level designers to see where we can stagger these, where to spawn enemies, things like that. So design has a lot of interdisciplinary talking, whereas with programming, you may not always have that, especially if somebody's working on engine programming and maybe you have a gameplay designer. You might make requests to the engine team to create something, but the design team, just like the art team, in my opinion, they work in tandem a lot.
So, in fact, I still have a memory of leaning out my door, and there was a narrative designer and a level designer, and they were talking really quickly in the hallway, and I was just looking at them like, "What you guys talking about?" Because it was just, you could tell it was something interesting going
Yeah.
on, and you see that a lot. Narrative designers and level designers get together to work out how quests are going to go, because the NPCs have to give it to you, but the level designers actually have to place the encounters and put the items in, and so they tend to work very closely.
Yeah, and level design needs to work really closely with the rest of game design too, to know how the mechanics work, right? You need to be able to set standards for your level design, but that needs to be based on what the gameplay experience is supposed to be. Any failure in communication between design departments can result in a very different feeling game from what the game should be feeling like. And that is usually where you have the producer or the game director constantly checking that to make sure it's going according to plan, or you might have a UX designer also doubling in helping out with like the whole game experience as a whole. But usually UX design is more closely linked to the UI. So you could argue though that UX design should kind of fit into that, but there's a lot of smaller disciplines that end up taking on like the game's experience as opposed to the user interface experience.
Now, there's 2 more areas where there are roles. I am less familiar with these areas because I tend to work with the directors in those areas, and then they distribute the work below them. but it's the audio department. Audio handles everything in the game that you hear: music, sound effects, and those sound effects could be on items, could be on particle effects, could be on, you know, when you open a container or open a door, or the sound a tree makes, you know, just a scenery item makes because it's being hit by wind. Background noise that you hear. Basically, if you hear it, you know, it's a sound effect. And then user interfaces have their own set of sound effects, and then cinematics usually get music and sound put in them separately because everything's so well sequenced that you don't have to do things independently. You can have everything work together.
It's important to note too that good sound design is very, very closely interconnected with gameplay. You never want, or most of the games that you'll end up playing will be games where the audio feels almost disconnected from the game itself. And what I mean by that is that there's no interaction between the sound and especially like the music system in a game. But the games that do that well can really elevate the importance of sound in a game. I'm not talking about games that are like sound based, that are like rhythm games or something, but games that utilize the tracks, the audio tracks, to elevate the gameplay. So a game like Darkest Dungeon, right, that I worked on, where as your torch meter got lower, it crossfaded in additional tracks into the level, so that like in the warrens, for instance, right, like the sewers, you would hear squealing of pigs and stuff like that. The more dark the level got, so that, you know, that shit was really cool. Another good example would be Octopath Traveler, which uses its audio system as a way to blend almost seamlessly from the narrative elements into the fighting elements. Bastion Game did this well with narrator reacting to behavior. That's another one. Yeah. Supergiant does that super well too. I mean, Supergiant does everything well, right? UX design is also a bit of a make it up as you go instinct role. That's true. To be a qualified UX person, you'd need a PhD in engineering psychology. Typically, these people's backgrounds are mostly mix of street psychology meets instincts. Yeah, there's a lot of that, I think, with game design as a whole, right? With anything related to design. It's like if you're a game designer, think, okay, we're going to make a new feature for our game. Okay, will it be good? Well, I think it'll be good. Well, can I playtest it yet? No, it's just designed. It's not even in the game yet. So how do you know it's good? Instincts plus experience, right? It's just, well, you know, this kind of worked in this game, and I'm playing it in my head and my imagination, and it feels pretty good. And then you need to convert that into the blueprints, right? Into the design documents, and the balance, of course, too, is very heavily impacting the feel of a system. So design, I would say UX design, just like the rest of design, is just so, it's so difficult to quantify and say that yes, action A will result in good feeling, because oftentimes it's just such a mix of, well, maybe it could, my experience tells me it could, these games that did similar things indicate that it might be enjoyable, but you never know. You never know until players get their hands on it, right? I think there's a good video too that shows Octopath Traveler's music system. We won't watch it all, but I can probably find it. Music analysis. There's this, it's this one specifically.
The best. As 8-bit music theory discussed in his video, Ulbricht's theme changes its key from D minor to F. The looping section of For Redemption is limited to staying in D minor, so that it can smoothly jump into the transition cue at any moment. The transition's purpose is to somehow find its way from D minor to the opening key of the boss track, G minor, which it does by the way of A flat major. One final consideration to make is the tempo. The boss theme is set to a brisk 164 beats per minute, So in order to maintain the momentum through the
Shit's
transition,
wild.
For Redemption needs to be locked to this same tempo as well. But Olbrich is only
I mean, I love that shit where it's like it's a beautiful, masterful blend of sound design with the gameplay's elements, so that you can transition between. These are two different tracks that it just blended between. If you didn't know, I mean, it kind of shows it over here, right? This
is a 25-second long track.
It's a 25-second long
will
track that loops.
continuously loop either forever or until you press the A button and enter the battle,
I'll just shut up
whichever
here.
comes first. When that happens, the track will immediately cut on the next beat to a short transitionary cue, which seamlessly connects the end of the lead-in track with the beginning of the boss track. Where it all gets more complicated is in the actual music. Because this transition can happen at any point during the 25-second loop, For Redemption needs to account for this in its composition, and as a result is quite different to anything else found on Octopath's soundtrack. Unlike the rest of the score, the melody takes a bit of a back seat here. You can't just use Olbrich's theme in this scene, because the melody would get cut short, leaving it unresolved and breaking the momentum in the process. Olbrich's theme is instead hinted at through the use of the horns, albeit in a much more textural way that allows them to be suddenly interrupted with minimal impact. The same goes for the key of the piece.
So it's absolutely crazy, and it does this not just once, but it does this with all of them, I believe. I think he mentions it here.
All 8 characters have their own stories, goals, bosses to face, and music that plays in the lead up to them. So actually, it's not just one track into one other, but rather 8 tracks that all perfectly build into the decisive
Yeah, it's
battle.
wild.
Let's get this over with. All right.
Each one was written not only to capture the spirit of the character, but all exist within the same limitations. A melody that can at any point immediately pivot to a new section, being locked to a specific tempo,
This stuff blows
and
my
remain
mind.
in a single key. But what makes this even more impressive is that there's a second boss
Yeah,
track.
there's 2 tracks.
Let's get this over with. Out of my way.
I don't know, it's absolutely wild, and they not only did this in the second game, but they made it even better. And the second game's boss battles and battle tracks are so fucking good. If you haven't played Octopath Traveler, you shouldn't. If you're into like sound design, highly recommend looking into Octopath Traveler, because whatever they're doing over there, it is next level compared to most games.
So that's audio. And then QA has a director for
audio.
a project, sometimes just a lead, if it's a smaller project. They handle all the testing of the game, finding the bugs, writing up the bugs, maintaining bug reports. They make test plans so that they usually work with the game director on this. The test plans are for different player builds, different play styles, which can be different than player builds. Like play styles like, I like talking to everybody, I like doing all the side quests, I like killing everyone. Then there's also test plans for console versus PC, and different consoles get different test plans.
Yeah, you have to do entirely different shit for consoles for each one. That's not just like, oh, PC and consoles, but there's PC, there's Xbox, there's PlayStation, there's Nintendo Switch, there's the Ouya. I'm just kidding, there's not that. But there's each of those, and each of those have their own requirements for compliance and their own requirements for things like localization, even interacting with the game itself, or like achievements. Both Xbox and PlayStation have their own separate standards for achievements. I think you can have an infinite number of achievements on Xbox. PlayStation, however, I think there is a limit, and there's also a limit to the number of points that they assign to achievements in a PlayStation game. I don't remember the specifics. I'd have to contact my QA friend, but I had to design, both the achievements for Xbox and PlayStation on one of the games I made, and it's really, really, really set in stone. There's even requirements that you can't make an achievement too easy to unlock on Sony, like a trophy. It can't be too easy to unlock. You can't have a game mode which automatically rewards you with a I don't know, if you like to earn $10,000 in the game, but you have an infinite money cheat. Well, the infinite money cheat can't automatically unlock that earn $10,000 trophy. Otherwise, the game will not pass certification. So there's a lot of shit that goes into it, and QA is the one that's on top of that and knows the rules, about like the back of their hand, and often contacts with compliance on each of these contact points with the companies and publishers.
And because they have different requirements, like what they require in the menu and save games.
It's really fucking annoying.
And just there's a lot of different requirements for all the different consoles. And production handles that, but they do it through QA. They may make test plans for playing the game at different difficulties. They often maintain large save libraries so that when someone comes along and goes, hey, I'm supposed to test a character who's a really talky character going through this area. They're like, here's a save game with a character with lots of speech skills about to enter that area.
In addition to that, too, you need to make sure of any game, if you have a QA team, or even for yourself, if you have good debug tools, you'll solve bugs faster, and you'll find bugs faster, too. If you skimp out, if you forget to make debug tools, ways to cheat in your game for the QA team, you're fucking them over. Hard. I watch a video about publishing next. I'd love to have your take on that, Indie Dev's take. Sure, share it in chat here.
Boom. They also handle minimum and recommended specs, meaning they will play the game on a minimum spec machine and also a recommended spec machine and report back not just bugs they encounter, but like how the frame rate's doing, and if things stuttered, and if it sounded good and looked good and was still playable and reasonably attractive. So that's all part of QA. I think that's everything in the game development roles. Notice I didn't touch on the administrative part of the company with the presidents and the VPs and HR and marketing. Notice I didn't talk about publishers, localization, all that stuff, which usually
so many people that go into game dev
group. I mean, it all goes on the credits of the game, but it's usually outside of what people consider game development roles. So, Seth the Guy GD, I hope this answers your question.
That was a good one. Another great one from Tim Cain here. If you guys want to give that a like and a watch, here is the link to it. Thank you, Tim, for another fantastic one. You have the Unreal debug tools installed? I think we do. For watching that on YouTube, thanks for watching that, and hope to catch you on the next one. Game development roles, Tim Cain. Go give him a subscribe. Bye, YouTube.